Now, at the same time that all this is happening, where Kamala can't even speak a single coherent sentence about what she believes or who she is, she's both everything and like people who are everything are also nothing. And the only people who can get away with that are people who are generational political talents. Obama was everything and also nothing, so you could read into him whatever you wanted. Bill Clinton had that talent. Trump has that talent as well. Kamala Harris does not have that talent, even remotely. Here is, at the same time that all this is going on, other people who support her, like Mark Cuban, are trying to attack Trump in a way that completely cuts against the grain of how people perceive Trump, and therefore confusing people even more about what Kamala is supposed to be in comparison to Trump. Here's Mark Cuban on CNN calling Donald Trump, quote, a socialist.
Compared policy proposals made by Trump to those from independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist. What do you mean?
Oh, it was a race for socialism, right? Bernie said that credit card companies should cap their rates, their interest rates at 15%. Donald Trump, being the socialist that he is, had to beat Bernie. So Donald Trump went out and recommended that interest rate caps be set to 10%. The fact that he's even suggesting price controls and price caps is socialism 101. You haven't heard that from the vice president. You have heard that from Donald Trump.
Well, just looking at American politics over the last, say, 8 years, does it seem advantageous to you for you to have, as one of your main surrogates, one of the richest people on the planet, a multi-billionaire who attacks Donald Trump for proposing policies that would curb the power of credit card companies and America's largest corporations to screw over consumers, or to degrade and to malign pro-consumer policies as socialism? And let's remember that Bernie Sanders is an extremely popular politician. During 2016, you ask anybody who traveled the country as a reporter, you go to labor union halls, it was extremely common to hear, my two favorite candidates are Bernie and Trump. And to someone who's a professional reporter or a political analyst or someone who works in DC, it makes no sense. You think about everything as left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. How does it make any sense to like both Bernie and Trump? But that's not how our politics are defined anymore. Socialist, communist, capitalist, right, left. People just want somebody who feels like they're going to stand up for them. Remember Trump's inauguration and his convention speech was, I'm here to serve as the representative of the forgotten man. And populist policies like curbing the ability of huge corporations to run roughshod over the rights of consumers. People know they have to wait online or spend 2 hours on the phone just to get the smallest thing, and then usually they don't end up getting it. They have no rights. The idea that sending out a multi-billionaire like Mark Cuban to denigrate Trump's attempts to say, I'm going to fight against big corporate power, whereas Kamala Harris isn't, that that's somehow supposed to be beneficial, reveals such an ignorance of the realignment and how politics have changed since 2016. The Wall Street Journal is sort of the bastion ground zero for corporatist interest. And it said pretty much the same thing when Trump came out and said, let's put a limit on how much credit card companies can screw over consumers with massive interest rates that they can never pay off. The Wall Street Journal, being the spokesperson for Wall Street and the wealthy, said on September 22nd, quote, Trump's price controls on credit cards, quote, he wants to cap interest rates at 10%. Is this the Sanders campaign? What made the Sanders campaign popular was that he didn't sound like a Democrat or a Republican. He sounded like he was an anti-establishment, pro-individual, pro-worker, pro-consumer politician. That's why he came so close to beating the Clinton machine. Now, here is, there are a few policies that Kamala Harris has embraced. Not fundamental ones, just sort of ancillary ones on the side, kind of symbolic ones. And for all the talk about how Trump is Hitler and Trump is the greatest threat to democracy, the ones that she's actually embraced are ones that actually came from Donald Trump. that often copied or echoed what he proposed. Here from CBS News in August of 2024, quote, Kamala Harris backs ending taxes on tips for service workers, echoing a Trump proposal. Quote, it's a proposal her opponent, former President Donald Trump, has touted all summer in an effort to win over tipped workers. Campaigning in Las Vegas on Saturday with running mate Governor Tim Walz, Harris pledged to work to eliminate federal taxes on tips earned by restaurant employees and other service industry workers. Quote, we will continue our fight for the working families of America, including to raise the minimum wage and eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers, Harris said in Nevada. Trump first announced his support for eliminating taxes on tips in June and has reiterated the stance frequently at rallies. The former president, in response to Harris's platform announcement over the weekend, called her a, quote, copycat, all caps. I mean, this is a big part of the problem, is that when you run and you just turn yourself into a chameleon who represents nothing, that nobody can grab onto, who is this person? Is she the far left wing of the Democratic Party and the liberal that she always claimed to be? Is she now this super moderate compromiser? She seems to be all of that and none of that. It's very, very difficult to trust politicians. People hate that more than anything. Here from NPR in July of 2024. Remember, I remember that. Let me tell you a little story before I get to this. In Rio de Janeiro, about 5 years ago or 6 years ago during the Trump presidency, a very well-known writer who lives on the Upper East Side came to Rio and asked to have lunch with me, and I met him for lunch. And he was telling me about all these, he's gay, he's part of a big gay couple, very wealthy in the Upper East Side. And he was telling me about all these wonderful fundraisers they were doing for like Amy Klobuchar and Kirsten Gillibrand. That's what all these very wealthy mega donors, gay donors in the Democratic Party do. They have all these fundraisers for the most mediocre and irrelevant Democratic Party politicians. They have a big, fabulous party at their house. Anyway, he was telling me about how he recently did a book reading. He wrote a couple of very, very popular books. He went to a book reading and he said, I'm going to read you a passage and I want you to tell me whether this sounds like Nazi Germany or somewhere else. And he told me that he read an article describing Trump's immigration policies at the border and how everybody at the YMCA and at the Upper East Side where he spoke said that sounds like Nazism. And he said, no, that's Trump's immigration policy. And he paused this dramatic thing, like making it seem like he made a really good point about how Trump's hardcore border policies were like Nazism, like a Nazi concentration camp. And now throughout this campaign, Kamala Harris is trying to sound as though she's even more hardline than Donald Trump is when it comes to the border. And is anyone going to believe this after people like AOC dressed up in white and did photo ops outside of a parking lot near the border, weeping and crying at the things they were supposedly seeing, the atrocities they were supposedly seeing? We were told that the Statue of Liberty was weeping over Donald Trump's immigration policies. Here's Kamala Harris, NPR and Kamala Harris's campaign strategy from July 30th. Quote, Harris tries to flip the script on Trump on the border during a raucous Georgia speech. Quote, Republicans have attacked Harris as a failed border czar who did little to stop migration, even though President Biden had asked her to find ways to address the root causes of migration from Northern Triangle countries early on in her time as vice president. Former president, that was so funny. She went to Guatemala. She went to like Venezuela. No, she didn't go to Venezuela, but she went to Guatemala. I think she went to El Salvador. Places she knew nothing about, had never been, and she was there to like investigate and she was going to cure the root problems that caused people to leave those countries and come to the American border. That was what her project was that Biden gave her. Former President Donald Trump has made border security one of the signature issues, building a wall on the southern border and using various restrictions to try to cut back on immigration. On Tuesday, Harris tried to turn the tables on this narrative, painting herself as a hard-charging attorney general of a border state who had walked underground tunnels between Mexico and California with law enforcement. This is the sort of thing that just is frivolous to people, and this is all her campaign is. Now, here from the New York Post, Kamala Kamala Harris announces her steel policy. This was from September 2nd. And the headline was, Kamala Harris announces her steel policy, the latest move ripped from Donald Trump's playbook. Quote, Vice President Kamala Harris announced she would keep U.S. steel under domestic ownership at her campaign stop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on Monday, marking yet another policy she has swiped from her opponent's playbook. Quote, U.S. Steel is an historic American company and it is vital for our nation to maintain strong American steel companies, Harris said. U.S. Steel should remain American-owned and American-operated. Former President Donald Trump had voiced opposition to the U.S. steel deal even earlier, saying in January that he would block the sale if voters return him to the White House. Quote, I would absolutely block it instantaneously, Trump said at the time. We saved the steel industry. Now U.S. Steel is being bought by Japan. So terrible. Harris has taken several policies directly from Trump campaign during her short time on the trail, including no taxes on tips and promising a child tax credit. It's actually pretty amusing because Kamala is having a great deal of difficulty distinguishing herself from Joe Biden. But if they asked her, what would you be doing differently than Donald Trump? I think she would have a very hard time saying that as well, other than to say yet again that she would protect abortion rights and she would really give a lot of love and good allyship to LGBTs. Now, there is a controversy brewing in the campaign that I'll just briefly summarize just to illustrate this point, which is one of the things that Joe Biden did that I think he deserves credit for, one of the few things, is that he appointed to lead the Federal Trade Commission a person named Lina Khan, who has a great deal of expertise in antitrust law and has been very aggressive in trying to prevent huge mergers and consolidations of massive corporations that prevent the little bit of competition and therefore the little bit of freedom that consumers have. And a lot of Kamala Harris's big donors who don't want any challenges to centralized corporatist power, like Mark Cuban, who calls every attempt to protect the consumer communism or socialism, as well as Reid Hoffman, who's donated millions, are demanding that Lina Khan be fired from the next, if Kamala wins. And yet at the same time, you have a lot of Republicans, including not just Josh Hawley, but J.D. Vance, Trump's vice president, who have been among Lina Khan's greatest offenders, explicitly on the ground that we need to protect American workers, we need to protect the consumers. They become anti-corporatist in their posture. And so a lot of people are assuming that Kamala Harris is going to be an extension of Joe Biden. She's going to be an extension of Joe Biden in a lot of ways. I actually think she's going to be an extension even more so of Barack Obama, because to the extent there were differences between Obama and Biden, it had more to do with the fact that Obama's administration was filled with neoliberals, with pro-corporatists. They were extremely close to Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Remember, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, Obama put as his Secretary of Treasury Timothy Geithner, who had been notorious for being a loyal servant to all of Wall Street when he was the head of the Federal Reserve in New York. His administration was filled with bankers. Jamie Dimon called President Obama called Jamie Dimon his favorite banker. It was a very neoliberal, anti-worker, anti-individual administration. And at least Biden had a few populist gestures, like some of these antitrust policies, like being a little bit more in favor of unions, that even Republicans who are trying to change the Republican Party from corporatist to populist, like J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley, cheered. And yet, the fact that Kamala Harris's biggest donors are demanding the firing of Lina Khan, who's trying to prevent even more corporate consolidation that runs roughshod over the American worker and over the American single individual, where you have no rights whatsoever to combat these mega conglomerates, while people like Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance are the ones who have been praising Lina Khan, and there are some Democrats doing so as well. AOC came out today and said, we're going to do everything to protect Lina Khan. It just shows that there's this realignment where these old-style campaign signifiers just simply don't work. You have to actually convince people. One of the things Trump did best that you're going to change how Washington works. You're going to enact policies that will actually improve their lives. And for whatever reason, Kamala Harris's entire campaign is structured around avoiding convincing people that they're going to change anything, to the point where she's even incapable in the friendliest of environments to identify a single thing that she would do differently than the current, very unpopular administration of which she's been a part for the last 4 years. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.